as I was saying, in a setting such as this, when we have a hard floor, often I won't kneel for prayer. So it's not some new phase in the development of our understanding of our prayer life. "30 or 40 people to all scrape their chairs and kneel can be distracting. People comment that I don't kneel when I pray. I just want to clear that point. And just another one. People question all the technology that we use in these Zoom studies. And how distracting it is. Which we agreed that it is. It's particularly distracting to me and translators who have a job to do. I've been asked numerous times, why can't we just go back to the old ways of doing things when it was simple? And the simple reason is this. In the past, all presentations were only done in English. Several years ago, we made a decision that we would integrate languages that we have across the world. And that's the reason why we have so many problems with our audio settings. So I hope you'll bear with me walk through these problems. Holy God, we do thank you that you have chosen to be with us and that each of us have the privilege of being with you. We pray that you would guide us through this sacred day in our conversations with one another, in your word, your blessing in Jesus' name. Amen. Of divorce. From yesterday, we spoke about the grounds for divorce. So I'm just going to quickly draw that out again. That we have two biblical reasons for divorce: death and adultery. There really are not other reasons given in the Bible. So if we want to, a phrase that I've used in the past, if we want to create new law, new rules, we have to use some kind of logic, some kind of methodology, argument. So what we're discussing are if there are any other grounds for adultery, for a divorce, sorry. Not only what are they, but what would be the argument valid? So two that are under consideration. One of them is abuse. Understand what wide subject. So we have two biblical reasons for divorce, death and adultery. And we're discussing if there are any other reasons. Abuse is an obvious one that covers a wide range of issues when we speak of abuse. We'll just condense them into physical and psychological abuse. Subject that we've discussed many times in the past. And what we've also been discussing, I'm just going to put any reason. So you can divorce for any reason that you want. And in the United States, this type of divorce is called no fault. Called a no fault divorce. So that's just a recap of what we've spoken of so far. What I have asked in the past is when we speak about divorce, why is adultery targeted? We know that adultery double L? Illegal sex. So we understand in just a generic sense that adultery is connected to illegal sex. I use the word illegal. Maybe we'd say forbidden. Because if you're married, it's not actually against the law to commit adultery. We know that, don't we? You're not breaking any law if you commit adultery. Any law of the land, of the country. I'm not aware of any country where it's actually against the law to commit adultery. That may be in some Islamic countries, it might be, where they have Sharia law. Okay, so the question I've asked is, why target sex? Why not money, theft, lying, stealing, all of those other sins? Why sex? Why target that? So that was the question. And the answer that I've given currently is that sex is the one thing above all others that we become vulnerable about. Our vulnerability is exposed. And people have accepted that as perhaps true. And I've discussed that subject in relationship to humans and God. And I'll put the word trust. which isn't a direct synonym, but it's closely connected to the subject of vulnerability. So yesterday at lunch, those of us who were sitting on the table where I was, we spoke about this subject at the spiritual level, not at the human level. And what that might look like with respect to a human being and God. Are we prepared to be vulnerable in our relationship with God? Expose ourselves completely to God? And do we trust God? Because God's quite transparent about what they do. But many of us ignore all the ugly bits or the dirty bits of God's history, of God's character. I take back the word character and I want to say behavior. When we see God behaving badly, we tend to ignore it. And I think we're required to come to terms with all the things that God has done which do not look good. But we're speaking about human relationships. And people have said, not many, that the answer of vulnerability isn't sufficient. It's not a good enough answer. So, separate to all of that, we've been speaking about either I'd call it the rise or the creation of patriarchy. So can someone just briefly tell me what patriarchy is? Just a really simple, succinct definition of patriarchy. Anyone? Elisa?
Dominion of men.
Dominion of men. We'll go with that. You're happy with that? The dominion of men. We could add over women, but it's not just over women. Patriarchy is a Greek word, I think, and it's made of two parts. The first part, my pronunciation of Greek isn't very good, so I'm just going to say tata. What would that be? Father. And archy, rule. So when you put them together, it means father rules, or the rulership of the father. So it's not just about men in the generic sense, which is why when Denisa said it, she didn't say, what phrase did she use? Dominion. When she said dominion of men, she didn't say over women. because it's not just about dominion over women, it's dominion over everything. For instance, the dominion of fathers over their sons. It's about the rights of the firstborn son over the secondborn son. So it's not just about men and women, it's more broader than that. So if we're okay with that simple definition, obviously, maybe not obvious, we understand what matriarchy is. The complete opposite. And I think we all know, Elder Tess has discussed this in the past. If we were to suggest, not prove, suggest that patriarchy is a far right-wing concept that's way on the right, then its direct opposite would be way on the left. So matriarchy would be, if it's the opposite of patriarchy, which it is, would be on the far left. And what's the difference between the far left and the far right? What's the difference between them? What? Nothing. Okay, I got enough people to say nothing. There's no difference between the two. And it's not something that she invented. You can go on the internet and you can see either some graphic or some argument or some logic to demonstrate that. And often it will be portrayed as a circle. So if we had a line, and this was the right and left, what you end up doing, if that's the center, that it ends up forming a circle where the right and left join together and they end up in the same place. So we've known for a long time, either extreme is wrong. Conceptually, the far left and the far right. And yet, you will hear occasionally in our midst that there are some people who advocate matriarchal societies. There's some kind of solution to the problem of men. And we should have known, all of us should be clear by now, that all and any matriarchal societies are, by definition, not only not the solution, that they are wrong. They don't fix anything. They perpetuate, if we call it crime, they perpetuate the same crime of control. Or, as Denise said, domination. Any questions? That was just an aside about the difference between matriarchy and patriarchy. So we've discussed, I'm going to say from the Old Testament, and I'm going to say my logic, that's me, And the second source was whom? I think that's correct. Angela Saini. So she's a feminist from the UK. And I can't remember what her background is, but she's a scientist of some kind. She's written a book, which I think is good, called The Patriarchs. We've discussed that many times. She's going to take an anthropological look or understanding of history. And we're going to take a biblical view of the same history. And they're very different, of course. So she's going to take 3 steps. You remember the 3 steps that she takes? This is the 3 progressive steps of history. So Magda said it's women giving birth, but it's not women giving birth. So I understand why she said that, but that's not what we're going to do now. So it's not physical. I haven't done this explicitly, but I have alluded to it. That's why it's not so clear for you. Let me just get this a bit clearer. So this is history. This is Saini's version. And then we're going to put, I'll just put the Old Testament version. So Thomas just said, hunter-gatherers. From hunter-gatherers, we go to agriculture. So when we've listed 1, 2, and 3, we're talking about how societies function, how they work. So hunter-gatherers, we have some concept of how they operate. The very nature of that type of society means that they're in very small groups. By the time you get to an agricultural society, they can be much larger communities. I said can be, but they have to be. Why do they have to be? Why did they have to be bigger? Because if this is your country, over here, you've got a carrot farmer. And over here, you've got a potato farmer. And over here, you have a blacksmith that's going to make tools. I guess besides the potato farmer, all the others would die if they didn't work together. So when you get to an agricultural society, it needs to be bigger in order for it to function. So you have a bartering system, which then develops into a monetary system. All good? So from agriculture, you go where? We haven't really discussed this, so we might have different terms. Cities. We'll go with cities. So I'll also put kingdoms. Cities and kingdoms. Kings, rulers, governors. Old Testament. Number one. Number one, not Babel. What's number two? So we'll go back to number one. Hunter-gatherers. Marco just said gatherers because we don't do much hunting. So we're going to gather, and we'll put Eden there because people said Eden. Before sin, we're gathering. Genesis 3, sin happens, and then God says, so the tomb is by your sweat, and it's agriculture. And then what? We'll have to jump forward quite a bit. I'm just going to put the same. We'll go with Tower of Babel. Not Babylon. Oh, okay, maybe it is. Maybe it is. Yeah, sorry. Tower of Babel. Are we okay with that? So we've connected the two versions of history together and they match. So we can use her arguments as much as we can use our arguments, or I will say biblical arguments. You okay so far? So often I've got Old Testament here. Everybody can see that. Often we go from the Old Testament to the New Testament. We might say the literal to the symbolic, or the literal to the spiritual. We're okay with that? So I don't want to use literal and spiritual. We mentioned the two words yesterday, but we didn't do it this way. We did it slightly differently. So what are the two words we want to put underneath there that we spoke of yesterday? Okay, so I'll see if I can find it. Can we see it? Okay, so that's the clue. What we're going to put. What goes under Old Testament? Not physical. Another word for judicial. Okay, so law. So I'm going to put legal, and New Testament, moral. So I'll show you what we did yesterday again. It's right here. Oh, not right there. Here. So adultery, we said sex, eye, emotions. That's emotional adultery that we've spoken about in the past. Sex is physical. The eye and emotion are thoughts. So even though the eye is a physical organ, it's talking about your thoughts. And from physical to thought, we went from judicial to moral, or law to moral. We're in Matthew 5, 27 and 28. You have heard in the past, Old Testament, some legal definition of adultery, physical sex. But I'm telling you, Jesus, that it's the eye or the thought where things begin, where the problems lie. And that's morality. And we had a discussion yesterday about which is worse, the moral or the legal. And I think we came to an agreement that the moral is the bigger problem or the bigger issue. We also discussed that even though morality is where the problem lies, when someone is going to be judged or their case is going to be considered, we don't go to their thought. We don't go to the moral. We go to the legal. So in the New Testament, it speaks a lot about a new heart. A new heart is a new follow through with the steps. It's not mind. Not new law. Isn't the eye the mind? We all know that the eye is the window to the soul. So Matthew 5 speaks about the eye. It speaks about the heart. Where is lust? It's an emotion that's in, obviously not your literal heart. When it speaks about the heart, it's speaking about the mind. So that's just a thought. Old Testament legal, New Testament moral. Okay, so far? So now we're looking at the Old Testament. And we want to break the Old Testament down. Tell me what the Old Testament is. It's what it's formed from. Because in the New Testament, they don't call it the Old Testament. They talk about the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, but not the Testament. When referring to that document, that book, how do they refer to it? So they don't use the word Moses. Thomas said Moses is law. Let's take out Moses. Good. The law and the prophets. I think most of us know what that is. As Thomas said, this is the 5 books, the Pentateuch. This is Moses. We just don't say the book. Everybody knows that. The prophets, I think, is clear. So you have Moses, he dies. Then after his death, you have what you call the judges, which then, and societally wise, do you go from Moses to judges to what? I've got prophets, kings. These are all the bosses. So I'll just put kings here. Now, when does the Old Testament finish? Who's the last prophet, the last book? So it's Malachi. And just in general terms, where are we in history? What's happened? Moses has died. Then we have prophets. Who's the last prophet? No, when we talk about the last prophet, I'm not talking about, because you'd say Malachi, perhaps. I mean, the one who's ruling. There's someone ruling the nation. Who's that prophet? Samuel. And then you go from Samuel to Saul. They want to be like the nations of the world. So we go from Moses to judges to kings. And when does the Old Testament end? Because it doesn't end a week before Jesus is born. What's happening, or what's just happened? Where are we? Zedekiah. The Old Testament doesn't end with John the Baptist. The Gloria says there's about 400-year gap. So I want to suggest, oh, someone's saying something? I want to suggest you have Moses, then you have the judges, and then they get fed up with judges. Why'd they get tied with judges? Because everybody has to take responsibility. They want a king to sort all their mess out. They have kings, which is okay. Then they go into apostasy because they copy the nations. And God's going to call that adultery, fornication. Then they're going to go into captivity. And then they'll come out of captivity. And then they get lost in all of their religious foolishness. And then you get to Malachi. And everything goes quiet. And then John the Baptist is born. Okay, so if we've got the law and the prophets, when we speak about law, rules, commandments, Jesus will say, I give you a new law, etc. If Jesus is going to give us a new law, where's the old law? You've got 66 books to choose. No, 39 books to choose from, sorry. It's 39. Yep. So you've got 39. Where's the old law going to be found? So Debbie and Gloria says the law as on the board. Any other offers? Is all the law contained in the book or the books that are called the law or the section that's called the law? I'm going to say yes, in agreement with what they said. There's no law given in the prophets, which is essentially the transition from judges to kings to punishment to just, I'm just going to say they're just wandering in the wilderness until John comes. They lose their direction. So in the New Testament, when they're talking about the law, remember we discussed yesterday, the scribes and the Pharisees say, in the law, or Moses said, we do this. With respect to adultery. When Paul ever addresses the subject of the law, it's always dealing with, I'll just say, as we've got on the board, these 5 books. Are we okay with that? Why are we making that point? Let's recap. We're just going to recap visually. I'm not going to tell you yet. See if we can work it out together. There's not much there on the screen. And this was just a little bit of side information. We spoke about Old Testament and Saini. And we compared them slightly differently to how we've compared them in the past. We're okay with what's on the board. And then we spoke about the legal and the moral. Then we took at the Old Testament and we said it's actually in 2 parts, the law and the prophets. And so I'm going to say in the New Testament, when it says you have been told, it refers to what I'm going to be calling the law, the 5 books. I've just forgotten what my question was to you. What was the question I just asked before this summary? Okay, I can't remember. Oh, I remember now. This law that keeps getting referred to in the New Testament, we know it's in these first 5 books. So now what I want to do is we have law and prophet, and we want to, I guess, line upon line, maybe I'll say it that way. I want to overlay on top of that same history of the Old Testament, but put some other words down, some other argument, another framework. That frameworks we've already discussed. And the only place we would have discussed it is here. Because it says history. So I want to get this history and I want to overlay it onto this history. This is the Old Testament. Who doesn't understand what I'm talking about? So only one person doesn't understand. I've got Old Testament here. And I have Old Testament here. In this one, I've laid out all of the history of the Old Testament. Don't be beguiled by Tower of Babel. Because what number 3 is cities and kingdoms. I was okay to put the Tower of Babel because it's the first city after the flood. So I want to get that. And we're talking about the same history now, the Old Testament. Question or answer?
We normally understand the Tower of Babel being evil. But
when you said Tower of Babel, I didn't think evil. I'm just saying it went from agriculture to cities. That was all. Because we could argue that agriculture is pretty evil. Certainly a result of sin. Because the agricultural model wasn't God's design. We were just meant to be gatherers. Okay. Anyone going to fill this in? Anyone going to fill this in? Complete this? What have we got? 3 things. Hunter-gatherer, agriculture, cities. Let's populate our board. Because we've already got 2 things here. Debbie. So I've got hunter-gatherers under law. Is that all? No more? Or you want to leave it for someone else?
I'll leave it for somebody else.
Gloria?
that prophets is agriculture.
Cities? I've only got law and prophets. Remember, the prophets is all of the rest of the 34 books. Remember, prophets is kings. The history of all the kings. Cities go where? Magda. Anybody see a problem?
I would put the agriculture under the law. I think the hunters and gatherers are before the law.
Okay, so I'm going to leave it. The main thing I wanted us to see that agriculture doesn't go under prophets. It's in the history of the law. And the law is 5 books, which goes right back to Genesis. So I agree with what Magda said. So I don't mind doing this. I'll call it Law 1 and Law 2. But if I do that, you've got to remember that there's no such thing as, it's never termed that way. And then it would work. Then it would work. The before sin, gathering. After sin, agriculture. And then sometime in the future, they gravitate to cities or kingdoms. If I can say it that way. Is everybody okay, or they're not, or is anybody confused? So, Esther.
In the Garden of Eden, there was one law. Not to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge.
Okay. Did you get that? Okay. So what I want us to focus on is that the 10 Commandments, the laws of Moses in particular, they're all focusing upon a nation that is going to live in an agricultural way. So all the laws are focused on a people that live in a particular way. The problem that you're faced with, the Israelites gravitated to become a kingdom. They're still very agriculturally based, but they then start behaving much more like what we would understand cities and kingdoms and kings to be. It went on for a long time. I'm sorry. When that happened, you think that they needed more law? Or was the law sufficient? So Gloria thinks they needed more law. So I don't mind different or more. I'm just going to say more. Where is that law? Because it's not in the Bible. If they created new law. Debbie?
Laws came into play. Laws came into play.
We got it the first time. My look was not what the law was. Where is it?
In the cities, government, governors.
So it's not in the Bible. So if there was some new law, The Israelites must have written it somewhere, documented it. Where would those laws be?
Talmud.
Who knows anything about Jewish civil life? Over here? It's a bit more on their head, a bit more than that. Anybody got any thoughts? Definitely not in the sanctuary. The only thing in the sanctuary, the Ten Commandments, and all this agricultural stuff. All the agricultural laws are in the sanctuary. Anybody go for it? So Mike, please. Tell us what the Torah is.
The Torah is a collection of oral laws which explain the 5 books of Moses. They consist of several books and collections, the Gemara and others.
So if I were to say it this way, tell me if this is accurate. The Torah essentially is the 5 books of Moses with commentary. They're going to start that they don't just leave the books alone. They start having a big commentary with it and explaining what all of these things mean. That would be the Torah. Not sure?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And the other book is the Mishnah, if I can call it a book. Just going to get my spelling correct. I'm not 100% sure about the Torah. I'm just going to put the Mishnah, but for the moment. So they have some legal books which they can't put into the Bible because it's not a thus saith the Lord. It's to meet the changing needs of Jewish society. But we don't have that. All we have are laws that are centered around what kind of society? An agricultural society. We don't have laws which are centered around a city or a kingdom-based society. Today, what are we interested in? We're interested in the city-based laws. We're interested how, why, or if the laws change. I can assure you they changed. Several of the laws that we're dealing with, I say several of the laws, we're talking about adultery and divorce. That's what our subject is. There was a development in Jewish understanding of these laws surrounding adultery and divorce. but we don't have, we could find them if we read the books. They're available on the internet. But we don't use that information because we say we're Christians and it's the Bible and the Bible only. So I want to summarize. We're looking for new guidance, or we're looking for guidance for new reasons to divorce. We want to try to understand why sex is the only reason that's given in the Bible for divorce. The reason is, when we say illegal sex, it means to do with law. And the only laws that deal with divorce are found where? In the Old Testament. Which bit of the Old Testament? The law. And those laws that were written in the segment of the Old Testament called the law were dealing with what kind of society? An agricultural society. So what I'm suggesting, if not saying, is that when we investigate the biblical laws that surround the subject of divorce, we have to view those laws in what context? In our context, it's option one, a universal concept, like these laws will apply through every generation. They're a principle. So for us today, for humans throughout time, or a couple of thousand years ago, in a very specific segment of human history, when I say human history, we could just say Israelite history, when they lived as farmers. Which is it? 1, 2, or 3? So when I frame it this way, it's obvious that the answer is number 3. So I hope what we can see clearly now, even if we haven't arrived at the answer yet, that the laws that Christians abide by today, the laws of divorce, are not just old laws. That's not the argument. What is our argument? Who wants to have a go? What's the problem? What's the issue? I don't want to call it a problem. What is the issue that confronts us when we look at the law of divorce? It's given us in inspiration by God. The issue is, we want to have a go? Peter, and then Tamina. You have to wait. You'll have to wait.
That we live in different dispensation than when the laws were given.
Did everybody get that? That's what's been missing in the minds of many people. These are clearly, hopefully now clearly, dispensational laws. They're not universal. There may be some universal principle that we can extract, like the golden rule. I'm sure that will be tucked somewhere in this story. But to take, I don't want to call them old laws, but to take laws that were constructed for a specific type of society and I'm not saying apply them to the 21st century, no. But to apply them to a different, I'll use the word Peter used, dispensation, if not wrong, can be very dangerous. And you can very easily come to wrong conclusions. Tamina, do you want to say something? Okay. Does anybody not understand where we've got to at the moment? All, I'll call it biblical laws. And, we would say, thus saith the Lord. God has spoken. So all biblical law dealing with divorce comes from an agricultural model. Is that a fair summary? That all of us could leave the meeting now and understand conceptually. I'm not saying we've got to the complete answer yet, but if we couldn't get to this stage, I don't think we can progress. So if we're okay there, then we want to begin to discuss or understand. Many Christians would think this is heretical to say the following. What's the problem with the law? Because I'm suggesting there's a problem. Magda?
Ownership.
Didn't come through? So, I hope everybody understood what she meant by ownership. We have this idea, this model, that God is beautiful and perfect and nice. God doesn't do things wrong. And yet, when you go to the Old Testament, particularly, I'd say the Bible, in fact, you'll see that God and God's prophets do many things that you would never agree with, which means you think they're wrong, which means you have to come up with some kind of answer for yourself to explain what's going on. So this is what we're trying to deal with. I introduced a phrase recently that's connected with this agricultural model. Did you use the word control? What word did you use a minute ago? No, you, just a minute ago when you said something. Ownership. I want to just put that word down. What phrase have I introduced recently that's connected to the concept of ownership, but it's related to the agricultural model? Sorry, Debbie. No, it's fine. It's fine. Don't worry. So it's intergenerational wealth. And that's why Magda said ownership. Because ownership is all tied up in this intergenerational wealth issue. So I've touched on this from several perspectives, and the difference between an agricultural society and I'll just call it a city society. Can you have, I know yesterday in Denise's study, she says, we will never have equality on this earth, which is true. But we know that humanity today, compared to yesterday, very different. We have developed. The story of redemption has been working. And societies today are very different. I'm just going to say they're better than they were in the past. And what I've commented on is that one of the biggest drivers for equality is what? It's the move from something to something. It's the move from agriculture to cities. Because once you move from agriculture to cities, it's not a perfect, beautiful story, but it's a close enough approximation that I think it's correct. That this subject of intergenerational wealth, the subject, which is the subject of ownership, which is the model of divorce, the model that's given in the Bible, that we think is some kind of universal principle about how relationships come to an end, that once you go from agriculture to city, those laws don't work. They need to be reevaluated and reconsidered. And what's hidden to many of us is that even the Jews had to confront this issue when they created these extra rules, these extra laws. which Ellen White condemns, by the way. He says they should have stuck to the law and the law only. Run out of time? So I just want to say one more thing. When you read Ellen White's writings, she speaks about the law. We agree with that. What law is she speaking about? Sometimes it's the law in your heart. Morality. That's all fine. When she says law, what does she speak of? She speaks about this law. Specifically, this one. And she says, in the 19th century, what are you supposed to be doing? Living your life according to these laws. From what you know now, was she right or wrong to insist upon that? Wrong. Anybody think she was correct? No. Nobody thinks that. She's living in a very different world, and she's applying, enforcing agricultural laws that are no longer fit for purpose upon God's church. And that's why many of her arguments, her positions, I'll just say, look strange, but in reality are wrong. And that we have now had to look at, be confronted with them and change. Often we just reject them. And perhaps we've not understood why. Why do we reject so much of what she says? And I'm suggesting it's this reason. This whole subject, I'm just calling it agriculture, intergenerational wealth. We'll just go with Magda's version, ownership. What she wants to apply to a modern church that's forging ahead with equality, that's moving ahead with equality, it's forging ahead, is the shackles of ownership. Shackles are handcuffs. Good. She's the one that should have broken those things. She should have been doing what we're doing now. Church, Adventism, is still stuck with those shackles. This is why we're confronted, or in where we have confrontation with her writings. We haven't finished our discussion on the legitimacy of adding reasons for divorce, and maybe you're still not clear, according to the Bible, why it's only sex that's that defines whether you can divorce or not. Means I do again, or you all good? Let's pray. Holy God, we thank you that we can be set free that we can begin to understand you better. Each of us knows when we're in a relationship with someone who doesn't see things the same way as us, relationships can be difficult. I want to thank you, not only in my life, in the lives of members, in this dispensation, but in all the past ones, that you are willing to work with weak and feeble partners, that you are willing to be all things to all people. In Jesus' name, amen.